We'll be discussing a couple of more problems on compound interest, and especially previously we have discussed all the problems where the interest is compounded on an annual basis or once a year. But what happens if interest is compounded like more than once a year, or maybe like every 6 months, or maybe every month, or even daily? So how do you solve some of these problems? Okay, so let's talk about that. Suppose you're given $5,000 at 6% interest, compounded annually. Compounded annually, okay, for 3 years. Okay, now compounded annually means interest is calculated once every year. Okay, so we know that in this case, like a future value is equal to present value into 1 plus r raised to t, and present value is $5,000, r is 6%, and t is 3 years. So this should be fairly easy. So future value is equal to 5,000 into 1 plus 6% is 0.06 raised to 2, that is 3 years. So this is 5,000 into 1.06 raised to 3. This is equal to 5,000 into 1.91, oh 191, sorry, 191,016, okay, which is equal to $5,955.08. Okay, so at the end of 3 years, if interest is compounded annually, that means that if interest is calculated once a year, then you will have $5,955.08 at the end of 3 years. Now, what happens if interest is compounded like more than once a year, like every 6 months? Let's say you want to find out what happens if interest is calculated every 6 months. Okay, because there are cases in real life where interest is even calculated on a daily basis. So let's try to find out interest is calculated every 6 months. So you're given $5,000 at 6% nominal rate of interest, compounded semi-annually, for 3 years. Okay, now when interest is compounded, or when interest is calculated more than once a year, what we do is, like, instead of looking at it on a per year basis, we look at it on a per period basis. So we look at it as a per period basis. So in a year, interest is calculated twice. So the number of periods in a year is 2. So that means that in this case, n is equal to number of periods is equal to 2, because we are calculating the interest twice a year. So n in this case is the number of periods is equal to 2. And also, when you calculate the 6% interest is on a yearly basis. So if you are calculating interest every 6 months, so interest rate will be n r. If r is the rate of interest, interest rate will be r divided by n, or in this case 6% divided by 2, which is 3%. So interest rate that we'll use in the formula will be 3%, or it's r by n. And as you can see, like the time frame, since it's for 3 years, but every year has 2 periods, so the time frame will be t multiplied by n, which is 2 into 3 into 2, which is 6. So there will be 6 periods for which the interest is calculated. Okay, so we can write future value. We know that future value is equal to present value into 1 plus r raised to t. Now we know that in this case, since we are calculating interest over 2 periods in a year, so r will be r by n. So in this case, r will be r by n, and time will be 6 periods, so that will be t by n. So this is the formula to calculate interest when you have interest which is calculated not on a yearly basis but more on like a semi-annual basis or even on a monthly basis. So future value is equal to present value into 1 plus r by n raised to tn. Okay, so let's try to find out what the interest value will be 3 years. Okay, so we have present value is $5,000. We are given that r is 6% and t is 3 years and n is equal to 2. Okay, so future value is equal to 5,000 into 1 plus 0.06 divided by 2 raised to 3 into 2, because we have 3 years and each year has 2 periods. We are calculating the interest twice. Okay, so this is equal to 5,000 into 1.03 raised to 6. This is equal to 5970.26. Okay, so you notice that when interest is calculated on a semi-annual basis, we get at the end of 3 years 5,970. But when you look at when interest was calculated on a yearly basis, it was 5,955. So that means that if you calculate interest much more regularly or even like more frequently than on a yearly basis, the amount of interest that you end up or the final amount will be more than when you calculate interest only on a yearly basis. And in this case, it's about $15 more than when interest is calculated on a yearly basis. Okay, now what happens if we calculate interest on a monthly basis instead of like every 6 months? Let's try to find that out. At 6% nominal interest rate, calculated monthly for 3 years. Okay, so in this case our present value is still $5,000. R is equal to 6%, that's your annual interest rate, and N is equal to 12 because we are calculating the interest monthly, so N will be 12, and T is equal to 3 years. Okay, we are calculating interest over a course of 3 years. Okay, so we know that from the previous formula that we looked at, future value is equal to present value into 1 plus R by N raised to Tn. Okay, so we can write future value is equal to present value into 1 plus r by n raised to tn. Okay, so present value is 5,000 into 1 plus 0.06 divided by 12, because we are calculating interest on a monthly basis. So t is 3 into 12. Okay, so that means that it's 5,000. 0.06 divided by 12 is 0.05, so it's 1.005 raised to 36. So this is equal to $5,983.40. So you'll notice that if interest is calculated on 6 months basis, it was $5,970, and when interest is calculated on a monthly basis, it's $5,983. So that means that if the frequency of interest calculation increases, that means that if you calculate the interest more frequently, then the amount of money that you have end up will be more at the end of the time frame. So let's summarize this in a table or something like that. The principal amount or principal amount, so and final amount. So if you're calculating the interest yearly, the principal amount is 5,000 at 6%. You will end up with, if you're calculating the interest yearly, you'll end up with $5,955.08. So let's write that out. It's 5,000 $955.08 after 3 years. Okay. Similarly, if you calculate it semi-annually, it's $5,000 at 6% nominal rate. You'll end up with 5,970.26. Okay. And if you calculate it monthly, $5,000 again at 6%, you'll end up with $5,983.40. $5,983.40. So as you can see, as the frequency of interest calculation increases, so here we are calculating interest twice. The amount is $15 more than when you calculate it yearly. And when you calculate it monthly, the amount is even larger. It's about $13 more than the semi-annual interest. Okay. So again, just to summarize, as the frequency of interest calculation increases, the final amount increases simultaneously with that.